Kicking off right now, and we're going to be talking about that big TKO deal with Netflix. First time in 31 years, they're not going to be on TV, and we've got the details for you.
Oh boy, here it's back. I'll tell you what, Mark, you look great. I've never seen you look better. Wait a minute.
Here's one way you know it's not Mark.
He does have a heck of a head of hair, doesn't he? That son of a gun.
He's got some thick hair up there, and I got none.
You and me both, but that's okay. It's just an ability for people to see us that much more clearly.
That's right. Why cover up such a beautiful head with hair? That must have been what God was thinking. Hey, folks, he is Pete Najarian. I'm Jon Najarian. Jared Winkman is handling all of the dancing bulls, bears, in some cases, snowboarding bulls and bears, as well as the sound effects like this one. And we certainly appreciate all of you joining us. We will have fun, but we'll also be pretty serious about what these stories or catalysts for these stocks that we're going to cover on the Rebel's Edge, and then hit you with a little sports. So, Pete, let's kick it off with a little macro, shall we?
Let's do it.
Market started off kind of strong and then faded. Are we back to that open up and then trade down scenario?
I think it's just a matter of just how much the previous day influences the next day, right? And so we're seeing that, maybe a little bit of profit taking. We've had a couple of decent days in a row, John. But, you know, one of the things that I've been looking at is this consumer confidence that was very strong in the U.S., but when you look over to China, you see a little bit of a different story. And they're talking about 3 to 6 months of a painful economy is what one analyst was talking about. And that made me kind of wake up a little bit that, hey, look, we're not totally out of, into the beautiful parts of the world that we want to be in. There are still some headaches out there. There's still inflation out there. There's still a lot of things out there. And maybe that's part of today's, brief sell-off, at least so far in the Dow.
Yeah, very possible. And then time for, Pete, fantastic futures.
Fantastic futures.
That's right. There goes fantastic futures, man, flying across the screen. I always get that wrong. He flies like this. But anyway, Pete, you and Mark yesterday were talking about nat gas. Mm-hmm. And I got to say that it continues to be a topic, even though we've had extremely cold weather, which usually results in a fast turnaround for nat gas. Nonetheless, nat gas is down, Pete.
Yeah, and it just keeps getting pounded, John. January 12th, we were sitting at 340. Now we're underneath 240. That's a significant drop in a really short period of time. And it's something I think it's worth bringing up day after day because of the fact of all the different things that go into this whole thing. We talk about energy all the time. We talk about crude. Crude back up near 75 today, at least early on. But nat gas cannot catch a bid. And it's something I think that people should at least be aware of as they're looking at the markets, the global and everything else, just to try to get a little bit better read within what's going on in the markets. And we see a lot of inflation in certain areas, and we're also seeing a little bit of depression and maybe lack of demand in others and a high demand in some of the others. So there's a lot going on, I think, to digest when we're looking at these markets right now, John.
Yeah, and Pete, I think it's also back to Europe, of course, was the wild card when Russia cut them off from natural gas, and then somebody blew up the pipeline. So they couldn't, even if they wanted to settle, they couldn't settle with Europe. Now, Europe's been kind of lucky, not their ski resorts, Pete, because as you know, I was just there last week, and they didn't have nearly the usual kinds of snowfall, which means, as usual, that they don't have quite the same temperatures that they normally see, which means cold temperatures, demand for coal, demand for nukes, demand for nat gas. If you're not seeing that, that means some of the people that bet on it 2 and 3 months ago, like you said, even just in the last month when it was 340 per British thermal unit, now it's 240. If Europe had been cold, it probably would have justified 340. When it's warm, it doesn't.
Right.
All right, Pete, let's talk about this big deal, TKO, which is the UFC. It is the WWE. They are part of TKO, and that stock moving up strong today. First time in 31 years, Pete, they're going to be deserting television. What they're going to do is they're going to go over to Netflix. Well, most of us would say Netflix is how we watch TV these days, except for live sports. But now Netflix is going to be offering live sports, Pete. What do you think of this $5 billion deal?
At first, John, I thought, well, that might be too big. Maybe they're giving them too much money. And the more I've thought about it, I'm not sure that's right. Everybody wants live. Everybody wants live sports. And I think Netflix has been making a move. And a lot of, as we know, whether it's the NFL or other entities that are sports related, all of these different streamers want a piece of it, it seems like. And Netflix is willing to step up to the plate, and $5 billion. By the way, their free cash flow, John, at Netflix, just so everybody's fully aware, $18 billion. So $5 billion over 10 years, that doesn't even seem like it's going to make much of a dent, quite frankly. This is a really, really amazing move. I think it's a really smart move. TKO is interesting. It's also got some decent sized shorts in there, John. So when you've got about 6.5% short interest, that's going to give you an extra little squeeze. Well, they're getting it, and it's up about 20% today. So it's a nice move. I think it's something great. At first, like I say, I was a little apprehensive, but the more I've looked at it, I actually think Netflix might have stole this thing. What about you?
I agree. I mean, you break it down, Pete, it's a 10-year deal, so it's $500 million per year. Mm-hmm. That is basically 5% of what the NFL gets, because the NFL gets $10 billion a year. So if you think of it that way, yeah, I know their ratings aren't quite the same as the NFL. We all get that. But they do average 17.5 million on Comcast right now, Pete. And now those people are going to be loyal, I think, to the WWE, which means maybe Netflix sells a few more of these subs, even if they're ad subsidized subscriptions. So I think it's a good deal for Netflix. I agree with you. Yeah. All right. What about, and we had unusual activity. God, I almost forgot that, Pete. You were going to let me go without saying it? Unusual activity, folks. Take a look at that. Bang.
That seems pretty good.
Yeah. They were buying the April 81 calls. The stock at that time was basically 79. So they're only $2 out of the money in rough terms. Well, guess what? Today, they went rocketing to 93, which means the 81 calls are worth, $12. Not a bad trade, Pete.
Not bad at all. And it's $12 plus add in that it's an April option, John. So that adds time value as well. So it's well above even the number that we're putting out there. So that's a heck of a move. That's a great move. And somebody sniffed this thing out.
Yeah. And if you want to sniff those out, folks, go on over to marketrebellion.com/get started or it's not an option.com. If you need that book, well, we'll give you a free book if you go to marketrebellion.com/get started, and then maybe even link over to it's not an option.com. You can get over $100 worth of great educational stuff for free by going over there. All right, Pete, what about DR Horton? Home builders. DR Horton, mixed quarterly results. Basically traded down as much as 9% early on, Pete, making a little bit of a comeback. But, man, inflation and mortgage interest. Yeah, inflation's down, mortgage interest is down, but it's still almost triple, Pete, almost triple where it was a year and a half ago. That's the mortgage interest that you'd pay on a regular conventional loan. That's a lot.
Yeah, and you know, and John, you know, when you look at the earnings and sure, yeah, okay, they missed, but I think the reality is you look at the revenue, they beat on the revenue. You look at a lot of the different factors. They did they're doing things very well. Demand is still there. And this is a stock that if for the people who haven't followed it very closely, these home builders had a heck of a year. Yes, they're not part of the Magnificent Seven. They should be. When you take a look at DR Horton, John, it was a $96 stock that's now, it was $157 as of just not too many days ago. And here it is pulling back just a little bit. I think that might even be an opportunity because demand is still strong. I think that there's plenty there for them. When you look at their revenue growth, that's been pretty impressive. Their sales orders have increased 35% year over year. There's a lot of positives to go along with some of the negatives or one of the negatives. I think that this building industry is still in the right path to go to the bottom left, upper right, and I think they will in 2024.
Well, it'll be an interesting call, Pete. I tend to agree with you because mortgage rates are coming down. Yep. And you're not going to see the same rates, folks, that you could have locked in a year and a half ago. But they're a lot better than the 8% when we're now down here under 7% and falling, depending on what kind of term you want on that mortgage. All right, Pete, let's dive into 3M because earnings beat expectation, but management outlook ain't that good. And the stock just keeps going down, down, down. It was down 5%. Pete, it's almost down 12% at mid-session.
Yeah, John, when you look at 3M and you see the numbers that they put up there, their projections going forward, the guidance, however you want to, put it out there, but it just isn't there. And it's something that I think is something that people are going to struggle with because that is what you're looking for. You want to get those earnings, you want to get those revenues, those profits, all those things during the quarter. But, and we talk about this all the time, it's the guidance. It's always going to be about the guidance. People want to know, where are you going from here? And 3M, unfortunately, there's just way too many questions right now. Is it an inexpensive stock? Is it value stock? Yeah, you could call it that. But my concern about that is maybe it's a value stock for all the right reasons. And this is one of those names that it's fine. It trades at like a 9 PE. Okay, that's great. But you know what? You've got to have growth. And they're not showing us that they've got the growth that they need to have in the markets that we're in right now.
Yeah, and I don't think, Pete, it's because of mismanagement. I think, like a lot of companies have said, the economy for, obviously the administration right now would like the economy to be gangbusters because, here we're, everybody's feeling better about things. No, they're not. 3M just said, that they're realigning inventories, all of their big customers. And who would those be? Home Depot, Menards, Lowe's, a lot of those, as well as other avenues that they sell into. But I'm talking about the consumer side, Pete. And if consumers are saying, you know what, I don't really need that duct tape that bad right now, I can hold off on that purchase. And thus the stores are not seeing people just coming in there and buying anything. They're instead saying, hey, they're realigning. And I think that's a big negative, Pete, a big negative.
A far more selective buyer for sure, John. And I think that is a problem because they're not going to overbuy. They're not going to go in and just buy a boatload of whatever it might be. And probably another problem is some of the more expensive things that 3M has out there. And that's where people are really kind of backing off and saying, you know what, I can wait on that. And that's going to be a problem for them. And they were very clear about that being a major problem for them in 2024.
All right. Well, I'm not going to screw up this one, Pete, because we did have unusual activity in United Airlines. And why did we have unusual activity? I mean, doors are blowing off Alaska airline flights. United Airlines had to basically take their whole fleet of 737 Maxes out and basically check all those bolts on the doors. And they found several that weren't tightened properly. Now that's Boeing. That's Boeing and that's Spirit Aerospace or Aerosystems. That's not United. But nonetheless, they do need to check those. And so most of us would have said maybe they're not going to see the same sort of upside when they report this. But you know what they did, Pete? United came out and said, hey, 2024 earnings, we're thinking $9 to $11 per share versus $9.61. Sounds like they're giving you some pretty positive guidance. They cut CapEx, which is spending, and then they said, you know what? We're thinking about maybe even moving on over and taking a closer look at Airbus because maybe we're not that happy with Boeing right now.
Yeah, not good for Boeing, but obviously for United, John, I think that you hit the nail on the head. I think when you parse through all the different information today, when you're looking at United Airlines, the thing that really stands out is, again, guidance. It's why you and I pound the table on the guidance. And that guidance of $9 to $11, and they're looking for about $9.48 was the number they were looking for. that's a very big, impressive sort of a number that they were able to put out there. So when I look at that, and I also look at the amount of shorts again, and I do bring this up all the time, John, but I think it's for all the right reasons. You've got a short interest of 5 to 6%. This is a major company, a blue chipper, so to speak. United Airlines, everybody knows the name. Everybody's used them probably in some time in their life or whatever. And you look over and you see those shorts at that sort of a level. That's also one more reason to give that an extra push to the upside. And that's why I think the stock, I think it got up over 42 at one point today, John. It's probably pulled back a little bit because the markets have pulled back a little bit, and that's going to affect others. But this is a big number, and you see United making a move all the way up through 42. That says a lot about what people's interpretation was of that guidance.
Yeah, and it's up almost 8% right now, Pete. And remember, folks, we did have unusual activity in this one. What does that mean? That means, like Pete said at the top with TKO, somebody thought that they had a pretty good guess that maybe they were going to offer some positive guidance and so forth. I mean, look at that. They were buying, Pete, the 45 calls in March, the 45 calls in February, paying just a little for those things. And on a big move like this, they're turning that into cash. And if you guys would like to follow the same sort of activity that Pete and I follow, well, and Mark as well, go on over to itsnotanoption.com. That's itsnotanoption.com. Even if you're an intermediate or even advanced options trader, you get a free book. You'll see a bunch of our strategies in there. And we talk about how Pete and I love to follow unusual option activity. All right, Pete, I'll let you take sports. Take it away.
All right. Well, we always like to hit sports. John was a former linebacker with the Bears. I was a linebacker with the Vikings in Tampa Bay and a few other places that they traded me around to get to. But so we've got a pretty interesting background there. We both played just about every sport there was in high school. So we got a pretty good feel for this whole thing. And I'm going back to college, John. I'm going back to talk a little bit about Jim Harbaugh, not John Harbaugh, Jim Harbaugh. Everybody wants this guy. And it's kind of interesting, isn't it? Because he had all the scrutiny last year in the NCAA, and he missed 3 games. Then he missed another 3 games, and they win the national title. His best year, obviously, at Michigan so far. Does he want to go to the NFL? And so I guess I throw it out to you, John. He's going to have his second interview with the LA Chargers. He did play for the San Diego Chargers back in the day, and he bounced around the NFL at quite a few teams himself, very similar to me. But and we did play against each other. Jim's exactly almost identical age, birthday, and everything as I am. So we're both 2 60-year-old guys kind of kicking things around. I'd like to be kicking it around in football too. But he had a second interview, by the way, with the Atlanta Falcons, John. If you're looking at Jim, first of all, I think the LA is the layup team. If you're going to look at those 2 franchises right now, I think LA stands out for me because of the quarterback and the rest of the team that they've got. They've got some age. They've got to do some changes. But I think you've got a quarterback that can get you to the promised land, so to speak. And he is a quarterback whisperer. But I look at it, John, and I just wonder, does he stay at Michigan? Is he leveraging them right now? Last year or 2 years ago, he interviewed for the Viking job. And, he's been kicking around, kicking tires for a while. What do you think? Is he a guy who is just sort of moving things around and trying to get Michigan to give him that contract that we've talked about? Or is he going to the NFL? I'm going to say he's going to the NFL, and I think he goes to LA. I think he goes with the Chargers. What about you?
Well, it's possible, Pete. Yeah. It's also, if he goes to the NFL, it's possible and probable that he will get a record-breaking contract. So when you look, of course, NFL teams make a lot of money. We all know that. We talked about they make $10 billion a year off of TV alone. Forget about the live gate, forget about merchandising and all the rest, and their own network. There's a lot of money in the NFL. And one of the richer people in the NFL, quite frankly, Pete, because there are multiple billionaires. Many of them, like Jerry Jones, became billionaires by owning teams because Jerry Jones was rich down in Dallas, but now he's crazy rich.
Yeah.
There's a guy down in Atlanta, Pete, who makes Jerry Jones look like a pauper. And that would be Blank, the co-founder of Home Depot, folks. So if he wants Jim bad enough and he thinks Jim can fill that big stadium, because, that Mercedes-Benz Stadium, Pete, is huge They can put 90,000 plus in there. It's built for hosting Super Bowls and all kinds of things. So I would offer, Pete, that depending what Jim Harbaugh wants, sure, he'd love a quarterback like Justin Herbert. But if he gets carte blanche and he gets, I don't know, $200 million or something like that for his next contract, that would be tough to turn down, especially if, just like he did in San Francisco, Pete, he took a crap team and took them to the Super Bowl eventually. He took a Michigan team that, yes, they have a winning tradition at Michigan, but they hadn't been beating Ohio State and they hadn't won a national championship in decades, and he turned that around. If he wanted to put his mark on the NFL again and did it with Arthur Blank's money, that's an interesting play right there, I think.
And he proved himself to be a guy at every single level to be able to have success as a coach, John. It's really, truly amazing because very few, if any, outside of Jim have done something like that. At 44, 19-1 was his record with the 49ers. He turned them around, lost to his brother in the Super Bowl. Just amazing what he was able to accomplish. So I think he can do anything he wants to do, but I think he wants to get back in the NFL, and maybe he goes to either LA or Atlanta. We'll find out. How about this, John? The NBA. Joel Embiid. Now, not everybody knows the NBA all that great, right? And I'll tell you what, this guy is big. He's a freak. He's an incredible athlete. And it's one of those things where when you're going around, you're looking at the NBA, one of the things that you and I used to do with our father all the time, when we go to Timberwolves games back in the day, we didn't go there to see the Timberwolves. We went there to see Michael Jordan up close and personal, right? And it was always great because Michael wasn't a guy who just sat did a little load management or any of those kinds of things, right? He was always going to be on the field, on the court. So that was great. This guy last night scored 70 points, John. Now, 70 points. He beat a guy who is one of the most historic basketball players ever, Wilt Chamberlain. He had the record at 68 points back in his era. And by the way, it didn't hurt my feelings at all that this 70 points went up against San Antonio, because that's a coach who actually did tank and did have all his guys doing the load management and all the crap that they were doing there. But Wilt did drop 100 back in 1962, John. So that's still something that I think the NBA should still look at and just go, this guy was unreal. But I think what people need to know in the NBA is there are some great players out there that are still in the NBA at this point in time that you almost should go and watch just because and marvel at how their talent really stands out. Anthony Edwards, I think, is one of those guys for the Minnesota Timberwolves. I think you could almost pick a player or two, at least out of each conference, and say that guy is a different level than everybody else. And Embiid is one of those guys. Big, can shoot. He's unbelievably athletic. And it's really cool to see something like this happen. And the numbers were there, John. It's not like he was just going out and firing the rock. He was shooting at a very high level percentage-wise and everything else to put up that 70 points. So congrats to him. And I'll tell you what, it's not the last time. I think this guy's a guy that maybe tries to look up and say, well, Wilt got 100. Maybe I got a shot. And maybe he does. By the way, Wilt did that when there wasn't a three-point line either. So, every once in a while, those big boys can shoot those three-pointers. So it's always kind of interesting. It kind of adds it.
Yeah. Well, Pete, the Sixers, are lucky to have this guy. 24 points in 12 minutes. And then you get to the second quarter, he puts in 10 points. So obviously, he's on his way towards that 70, but it really got big after. And that's where the second half, when he came back in and just started pumping in points, very, very impressive. If you haven't watched it, folks, you should go check that out because that was a pretty amazing thing.
Yeah. So it's really cool. And I'll tell you what, it makes you a little bit more excited about the NBA to see guys like that, good guys like that, who actually are out there playing and actually trying to do things that nobody else has done, or at least get really close to those levels. And I think there's quite a few players right now in the NBA that really do respect the game and respect the fans, and they play for the fans. And that's obviously the most important part.
Yeah, that's, if people are dropping a couple $100 to nearly $1,000 for some of those seats, Pete, I think the players that are bringing home 30, 40 million bucks, yeah, they owe it to the fans to put up those kind of, to play their hearts out every night rather than do this load management crap. I always agreed with you on that. Yeah. All right. Well, remember, folks, you can get a free book by Pete and Jon. It's called itsnotanoption.com. So go over there and pick up itsnotanoption.com. Check it out. And there it is. Pete's got it. It's not an option. I've got, God, Pete, I think I've got 400 of them that I'm going to be signing over at the Sequire event here in Puerto Rico at the Vanderbilt Hotel tomorrow and Thursday. So I'm really looking forward to that. But it's not an option.com, folks. You can get your free copy by going to that website. It's not an option.com. And Pete and I will be back 1 p.m. Eastern time tomorrow.